Good afternoon and welcome back. This is the 6th week of our Facebook Live podcast about domestic violence. Thank you all once again for joining us. And thank you all again for everyone who has posted questions and comments and who has shared our podcast on a weekly basis. We truly, truly appreciate all of your support. I am Sherry Pettipass, an LICSW, and with me as always is Jennifer Blum, founder and director of the Help Save Foundation. As we do every week, I want to start with giving you important emergency numbers. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is 800-799-7233, or you can text the word HOME to 741-741. And of course, in case of emergency, please dial 911. And in addition, you can always reach out to myself or obviously Jen through the Help Save Foundation, which is www.helpsavefoundation.org. I want to make sure I get it right, Jen.
You got it right.
All right. And I'll turn it over to Jen.
Hello, everybody. So during our last podcast, our entire focus was on the silent victims of domestic violence, and that is the children. And I discussed a lot of my own personal experiences with my own children and reviewed the clinical signs and symptoms to be aware of when you know your child or teenager has been exposed to domestic violence. As always, we want you to be able to rewatch our videos and to go back and take a look at what we've done. So you can absolutely go on to any of our pages, check out our previous podcasts on our personal Facebook pages, the Help Save Foundation's Facebook page, and also the Stigma Ends Here YouTube channel. So go check that out and become a follower of that. This week, we're going to go over a couple of things that we've touched lightly on before, not necessarily the warning signs of domestic abuse, but more the different types of domestic abuse. See, people tend to not realize they're in a domestic violence relationship because it's not a physical domestic violence relationship. So we want to go over some of the other types of abuse that most men and women go through when they're in a domestic relationship. And domestic abuse comes in many different forms. And Sherry's going to begin by defining these forms, and we're going to cite some examples. Of course, I'm going to utilize some examples from my own life. So you'll get an idea of both sides. And we really want you to focus on the fact that you might not realize you're in a domestic violence relationship, but you are in a domestic violence relationship. And just because it doesn't start off with someone hitting you doesn't mean that that's not what it's leading up to. And in most cases, it is exactly what it's leading up to. So I'm going to go over to Sherry, and she is going to talk to you about some different types of domestic abuse.
So I'm going to start off again with doing definitions and things like that, and I'm going to do my best to be brief. I know sometimes I when I'm doing the clinical piece, I tend to go on a little bit, but I'm going to try to keep it brief because I will be honest with you, and Jen and I have talked about this a lot. Each of the types of abuse that Jen and I are going to talk about today, to be 100% honest with you, we could do a full podcast on each one of these. And so today, please don't misinterpret that because we're going over each one of them and we're doing it brief. It really is just because we want to try to get you the information because we know how important it is. Cite the examples. Jen has some very important information she wants to give you as well, obviously. And then, again, if we decide that we should do a full podcast on any of these, we can certainly do that in the future. So I want to first define what we call intimate partner violence, or IPV. IPV is domestic violence by a current or former spouse or partner in an intimate relationship against the other spouse or partner. IPV can take a number of forms, and that includes physical, verbal, emotional, economic, and sexual abuse. The World Health Organization defines IPV as any behavior within an intimate relationship that causes physical, psychological, or sexual harm to those in the relationship, including acts of physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, and controlling behaviors. This is so important because, as Jen mentioned, we have talked a lot about domestic violence over the past weeks, but we have never really defined what we're talking about. Many people think of the stereotypical victim and survivor who has visible cuts, bruises, and broken bones. But there are other forms of abuse that leave no physical scars And because of this, it can make it very difficult and much harder to leave your abuser because no one sees any physical evidence. So again, I'm going to attempt to briefly define the main different types of intimate partner violence. And as I do that, Jen is going to also interject with her own examples and information. So I'm going to start with verbal abuse. And just note that verbal abuse, again, also sort of weaves a thread throughout all of these different types of abuse that I'm going to mention. Verbal abuse almost always, happens in private. But please note, and this is very important for friends, family, and coworkers, that this also happens in front of other people. And it's not just something that we can just ignore or brush away and say, oh, well, that's just between the two of them. Because if someone's willing to degrade their partner or disrespect their partner or husband or wife in public, just imagine the things that they may be saying to them behind closed doors. And these are the things that I think about when I hear people say certain things to their partner. And again, I know that people don't, sometimes like to stay out of these types of situations. But again, when you hear certain things being said to a person, especially if these are people that you're friends with, or again, family members, if they have the gall, I guess you could say, to say these things, you have no idea what they're saying behind closed doors, and it's going to be 100 times worse. So here are some examples of verbal abuse: name calling, condescension, manipulation, things like, if you really loved me, you would, and you can fill in the blank. Criticizing, demeaning, threatening. Basically, the abuser chips away at the survivor's self-esteem little by discounting their feelings. Jen, do you want to jump in?
I do. And, you really hit the nail on the head when you said that a lot of things, and abusers, a lot of times they can't help themselves. So they do say those things in front of other people. And you really need to be aware of what's going on because, like she said, those things are being done and 10 times worse at home. For me, my abuser, he absolutely put me down, did everything in front of people. He didn't care because as far as he was concerned, no one was going to approach him and no one was going to say that he was doing anything wrong. And those who did, they ended up pretty much in the same position I did. I mean, he's a very violent human being. So no matter what, he never felt as though he was doing anything wrong. Now, behind closed doors, traumatically and verbal abuse, it was horrific. I mean, my home was, I always say that the amount of trauma that was caused in my home with just sometimes the words were worse than me actually getting hit. I mean, there was one specific incident that they talk about a lot when we're in court and I have to testify again because, again, I'm one of 8 victims. And so there's a lot of court hearings that continue to go on because he continues to reoffend. But they bring this up all the time because it really does show the magnitude of a person. But, one day I'm sitting in the house and I'm with my 2 children, just sitting on the couch, minding my business. I hadn't done anything, hadn't even seen him for the day. And he literally walked in the house, just looked at me and said, "Pick a wall." And I thought, the hell's he talking about, pick a wall? And so I said, "What do you mean pick a wall?" And he just looked at me and said, "I want you to pick the wall that I'm going to splatter your brains on later." Now, not only is that verbal abuse, but understand that I was tormented inside, waiting for that to happen, not knowing when it was going to happen. Was it going to happen now in front of my children? Was it going to happen after I put my children to bed? Was I going to make it through the night? There were other days that he would walk in the house and he would just look at me and say, "Just the sight of you makes me want to slit your throat." Again, verbal abuse. Now, it didn't happen. Obviously, I'm still here. But imagine sitting there all night waiting for something to happen to you because that's what's been told. That's what he verbalized that he was going to do. And in many other situations, when things like that were coming to a head, it did happen. Mm-hmm. And so there you are, like the entire night, the next day, wondering, is today the day? Is today the day? Now, again, physically, he hadn't done it to me and he didn't do it to me, but that's what I was living with inside, was the fact that it could happen at any time. And what made this person feel just coming home and walking in the door like they wanted to harm me like that? What had I done that led someone to dislike me, or literally the sight of me made somebody want to slit my throat? I mean, I've never been in a situation where anyone has ever felt like that. And so here's this man who didn't actually have to hit me that day, but just what he verbalized and said to me put me in such a nervous situation for the rest of the day and night, not knowing what was going to happen to me. That's verbal abuse. Just because I wasn't being physically hurt that day does not mean that I still was not being victimized. And it was happening on a daily basis, whether I was being physically hurt or not. No matter what, every single day, I was somehow being verbally abused. And a lot of people don't find verbal abuse abusive. They think that, oh, well, he didn't hit me or she didn't hit me, so therefore I'm not being abused. And it's incorrect.
Right.
Feelings like that did more damage to my central nervous system than actually being smacked or being punched, because those wounds healed. That constant nervousness and being on the edge of your seat, not knowing what's going to happen, verbal abuse is just as bad, if not worse, than the actual physical abuse.
Absolutely. So you're sitting there and you're being threatened, not knowing when things are going to happen. And this is going to lead us into our next type of abuse, which is emotional and psychological. But one of the things that Jen and I have recently talked about is that, when we're having conversations sometimes with survivors, and people that are currently in domestic violence relationships, is when they can kind of look at us and say, well, if I'm not being I'm not being hit. And so sometimes that's the bar that they set. Like, well, if I'm not being hit, then all of these other things, like, then that's okay. So if I can say that I'm not being harmed, and there's no physical marks on me, then that's okay. And maybe they've been in other situations where that has happened, and so now they're kind of measuring everything to that relationship. So if I'm not being hit in this one, then pretty much everything else is okay. And they're convincing themselves of that. And part of why they're convincing themselves of that is because, again, you have somebody also consistently threatening you or consistently demeaning you and making you feel like you are useless, you are worthless, and convincing you that they're the only person that you could spend your life with, and that they're the only person that wants to be with you. And so this, again, it goes right into, and I'm going to get right into the emotional and psychological, but like I said, the verbal abuse really does, it's a thread that goes throughout every single one of these abuses, because it really does start with what is coming out of this person's mouth, that affects, unfortunately, the victims and survivors. And so emotional and psychological abuse initially, I say, is very subtle. And I know that, using some of these examples, people might think, what do you mean it's subtle? But making certain, saying certain things, it's not always as blatant, as some of the examples that Jen has used. It, initially, it's not somebody making such a blatant threat. So it is initially subtle, because you don't pick up on it, right away. Making a subtle remark, say you come home, you just got your hair done, and it's one of those little remarks of, it looks okay. I kind of liked it better the first, how you had it. And I get that that's not that big of a deal initially, right? Because, they don't have, your significant other doesn't need to like your hair. That's okay. But when you have remarks like that keep happening over time, maybe how you gain, did you gain a little bit of weight? Those pants didn't quite look like that on you the last time we went out to dinner. That's another one. Okay, again, it's not so overt, but it's something, and it keeps happening and it keeps happening. So that's why we say initially it's very subtle. It's not something that you pick up on right away. And it is characterized by a person subjecting or exposing another person to verbal and nonverbal behavior and communication that may result in psychological trauma, including anxiety, chronic depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Responses to both emotional and physical trauma, this is very important, are often similar and can result in disruptions in beliefs about oneself, relationships, in the world. And this comes from Dr. Holly Gardner, who's a psychologist at ASU, and making the point that, as Jen said, that the trauma that you suffer from a physical assault, physical abuse, and physical violence in a relationship is the same as what you can suffer from verbal, physical, from verbal, physical, and emotional abuse. Thoughts about safety, trust, power, esteem, and intimacy are often altered by the trauma, again, of both emotional and physical abuse. You cannot discount the severity of psychological trauma. Abusers do a great job of making their victims feel unhappy in the relationship. But understand that because they also make them feel dependent on them, it makes it very hard for them to, let me start over. I realize I said that kind of backwards and I apologize. Obviously, they made them feel unhappy. What I was trying to say is abusers make their victims feel dependent on them. And because of that, the victim begins to feel very defeated. And although they are feeling unhappy in that relationship, they feel as if they have no place to go. And because they feel so dependent on this person and that they're in a relationship with, again, because we're talking about emotional and psychological abuse, when I mentioned earlier, there's no way to explain this a lot of times to people. So how do you explain to somebody that you are being emotionally abused? It is very hard to explain that to a friend. And when you finally get the guts to explain it to somebody, whether it's a friend, a family member, or a coworker, it is really hard to explain to someone, especially something that has been going on for months, years, and to sit down with someone and say, this is what's going on. If somebody doesn't understand it, a lot of times what happens is the victim then kind of starts to look at themselves and say, if they don't understand what I'm trying to explain to them, then maybe it's me. Maybe honestly, I'm crazy. And maybe what my partner's been saying to me all along is it is me and I'm making this up. And really what I'm saying, maybe I am exaggerating this, because clearly the person I'm trying to explain it to is looking at me like I have three heads and they don't understand it. They become, as I was saying, that's one of the reasons they become completely defeated. And that's why they either, when they try to leave, they will sometimes go back, or in the end, sometimes they won't leave because of what just happened. And because of the fact that they're feeling dependent on that person. Some examples of emotional and psychological abuse are ignoring, mocking, isolating the person from family, friends, also co-workers, also their job. And we'll get to that further when we talk about financial abuse. Making statements like, I'm way smarter and more capable than you, don't piss me off or I'll take away your kids. I wish I could just smack you right now, something similar to what Jen mentioned. You're so cute when you try to concentrate. Look at her. She's trying to think. So again, another remark made in front of other people, degrading your partner. So again, you have victims that begin to blame themselves for their partner's misconduct because they start to feel, again, like, what is it that I'm actually doing? Because again, if I can't explain this, or I can't get myself out of the situation, and people are looking at me again like they don't understand what's going on, or they don't see what's going on, because again, nothing physical, it must be me. So now it's not only their partner degrading them and taking away their self-esteem, but now they start to really get their self-esteem is even lower, because now they're taking this all out, I'm so sorry, all out on themselves, feeling again like I'm worthless and he must be right and he's right about everything. Who's going to want me? Nobody. So right now, at least I have a roof over my head. Right now, this is the only place that I can go, so I guess I'm going to stay. And so the pattern and the cycle continues. Sorry, I just tripped over my words so much during that whole thing. But Jen, go ahead.
And to interject right there, I mean, one of the reasons this was important for us to do this week on my side was, I have worked with a woman this week who said other people thought she was crazy. She's not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
She's abused. She has gone through so much. And because other people didn't understand it, they said, well, you must be crazy. He never did those things. No, that's not right. Those things were done, and she was affected by it emotionally, physically, and verbally. Like every single T was crossed as far as what she's been through, and yet she's coming to me asking me if I think she's crazy. No, you're not crazy. That's not even a word that should be utilized, because the damage that's been done to somebody inside, emotionally and mentally, does not make you crazy. It makes you someone that now needs to heal and hopefully get the proper care that you need to move on in a positive way. But you're not crazy. And unfortunately, because people don't see all these aspects, and again, if you don't see someone with a black eye, or
Right.
marks on their arm, and you don't see these physical things that lead to domestic violence or lead people to believe that, people don't believe it. They think, oh, well, so what if he said this to you? And so what if he said that to you? And what we're trying to get across here is that these are all the beginnings. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to be assaulted for these things, for domestic violence to be taking place in your home. I personally was not assaulted for an entire year. My chain was broken down, meaning I wasn't hanging out with my friends. My friends weren't allowed to be around us. I was moved from being in the city of New Bedford, where I was, 10 minutes from my parents in Fairhaven, to being taken way out to Dartmouth, where nobody could hear me. Nobody could hear me screaming. No one could hear a lot of those things that he was worried were happening in the city. And people actually were starting to catch on to things. So instead, he moved me way out to the boondocks, where there I was, like, barefoot, pregnant, raising kids, because, that's where he chose for me to be, to get me away from everybody. But I mean, at that point, by the time I had children, I had already been abused. But it literally took an entire year of breaking me down before he actually physically put his hands on me. And I made excuses. I made excuses for, well, maybe I shouldn't have worn that today, or maybe I shouldn't have said this, or I shouldn't have looked a certain way today, or looked his way, or I made excuses for the verbal and the emotional abuse that ended up leading to the physical abuse that I could no longer deny to anybody.
Right. Absolutely. Um, and I think, again, you know, so it, and I think one of the biggest things is, so imagine really being at a point that you do start to realize that something doesn't feel right, and you do go and try to reach out to somebody, and like I said, and then they look at you. It's like it's being compounded. You have this person at home telling you all of these things, and then you go out and you try to have it, you finally say, I know something's not right, and you try to reach out and you try to get help, and again you start to feel convinced that it must be you, and now you have this person telling you at home, and then this friend, and maybe you go to another person, now it's a family member, and and remember, like, there's a possibility that, as we talked about in the past, that this person, this partner, maybe they haven't said all of these negative things in front of your friends and family, so they're seeing a completely different person, as we've talked about before. So you're coming to them saying he or she is doing all of these things, and they're saying to you that I don't really understand that, and I don't know if that's anything serious, and I don't even, like, he said this or she said this, but we'll just say, I'll just say a male. He's a really great guy. Like, when I see he treats you like a queen, and he bought you, didn't he just buy you this and didn't this? So you know what I mean? Like, there's also part of this whole reason why we also are doing this is to understand that, we don't, it's not on purpose, but as friends and families and coworkers, this isn't something that we want to walk around and think that this is happening to people we love. And I know we've talked about this, but if someone's coming to you, you don't want to automatically think that this person also it's been in your life is doing these awful things. Like, no one wants to start saying that a person that maybe you've spent time with, that you've gone on vacation with, that you go out to dinner with, that you attended this wedding, this, whatever it may be, the father of your nieces, nephews, whatever, is doing these terrible things. So it is really difficult also to stand by and say, to listen to somebody tell you all of these things. But here's the thing. If somebody's coming to you with this information, let's please assume that this is not a one-time situation, that it took them so long to finally come to you, that they trust you enough to say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. Let's just try to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're coming to you for a reason. And even if you don't fully understand what they're trying to say to you, that's okay. Just let them know that you're there, that you're listening, and and whatever it is that you can possibly do for them, because that may have been the only window right then and there, because if they don't get it, then again, they're probably going to go right back. And as Jen's pointed out, it took a year, for then the physical assaults to happen. But we would like to try to intervene, if possible. But again, when someone's reaching out, there's usually a lot of validity to that. So, again, that's another reason why we're trying to talk about all of these things. It's not just because we want, those in the relationships to kind of start, seeing if they're feeling in their gut that something's not right, but it's also for us to be aware when someone comes to talk to us about something that, these are all, huge red flags.
Yep.
So, so the next type of abuse that I'm going to get into today, to be honest with you, when I say I'm gonna just touch the surface today, is sexual abuse and sexual coercion. And I know for a fact that we could talk 2 podcasts on this at least. We could go on for a long time, and that is a really sad thing to say, but it's the truth. And I hate to have to even say that. So I'm going to just give as much information as I think is important today. Obviously, then Jen's going to take her piece. And again, I want to encourage anyone that truly, if you have any questions, any comments, anything, we are happy to discuss this further. And if we need to do more on this, we certainly can talk about that, because this is extremely important. And again, they all are important, but I just want to point that out. So while most intimate partner sexual violence, or IPSV, takes place in relationships where additional forms of violence are present, it is important to note that IPSV does occur in relationships not characterized by other violence. So pointing out that oftentimes the other types of violence that we're talking about, as Jen has said, happen sort of as precursors to the actual then physical violence. And sexual abuse and coercion, not a lot of times, but can occur without the actual other types of abuse. They can occur without the actual other physical types of abuse, or physical assault, the way that we, again, stereotypical talk about that, okay? And that's important to know, that there are people that are in relationships the way that I'm going to describe, again, that you may not see. As Jen said, the black eyes, the cuts, the bruises, the broken bones. But this type of serious abuse is happening, and this is still a form of physical abuse, also emotional, physical. I mean, it's the total. Unfortunately, I hate to say the total package, but it is.
All in one. Yep.
Yes. Intimate. So I'm just going to say IPSV going forward. IPSV, again, I'll just repeat it though, it's intimate partner sexual violence, is any form of sexual assault that takes place within an intimate relationship. It includes not only marital rape, but all other forms of sexual assault that take place within a current or former intimate relationship, whether the partners are married or not. IPSV involves using force, threats, or coercion to obtain sex or sexual acts, shaming a woman's sexuality or sexual preferences, and or not respecting a woman's sexual or physical privacy. And let me just say that, yes, I said woman, but this also goes for men. It was just easier to just use one gender. In a relationship in which IPSV is present, sexual violence is used to gain power and control over a partner. IPSV includes, but is so not limited to, the following, and I did cut this list down because I could have gone on. So, coerced or forced oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse, violent sex, which is physical abuse before, during, or after sex, forced participation in group sex or sex with another person, or sex with a partner watching or in front of children, unwanted sexual touching or being forced to touch, making degrading sexual taunts, use of technology to victimize. And we talked about this in an earlier podcast about taking pictures, taking videos and threatening, your partner to expose them to putting them on YouTube, sending them to their coworkers, family, friends, and again, as a way of using power and control to get what they want. Okay, so again, that's one way of using technology to victimize their partner. Using sex to prove faithfulness, withholding affection if sexual demands are not met. So again, if you don't do what I want, you know, there's other things. And again, let me point out. So this may sound withholding affection if sexual needs are not met. Well, why would you want this to be happening? What you're at a point in this relationship that this is not, this is a sexually violent relationship. So, but let me go back. Nothing starts this way. Right? This isn't necessarily, this isn't the beginning of this relationship necessarily. So when this comes up, so imagine you're in a relationship and it's these subtle, again, remarks. You know, maybe you tend to hold hands, get, you know, hugs, you know, maybe, you know, you cuddle in bed, whatever it may be, whatever. All of a sudden, those things that are typical in your relationship, you start to notice that they're not happening anymore. You notice even the way that you have conversations with each other, which are much more affectionate, that starts to be pulled back from you because one day or one night you were asked to do something and you didn't want to, which is your right. And then you suddenly start to see that all of those typical ways of affection that you had in your relationship, they're getting taken away from you. They're being withheld from you. So again, power and control over you because you didn't do something that somebody else wanted you to do. Another point before I turn this over to Jen, unless you had something that you wanted to add before I.
No, go for it. I was just gonna go right in based on what you
Okay.
had just
The
said.
only thing,
Go ahead.
the last thing that I wanted to add, because I don't want to interrupt her when she, because I want her to be able to go, is that, you know, another point, you know, like I said, sometimes people question certain things is, you know, when people look at, you know, relationships, and like I said, not everything happens in the beginning. So, and even so, we talk about, you know, relationships and intimacy and you know, and looking at women and say, well, again, you know, how is it that you did have, where did the intimacy come from? You have children with this person, and you know, that can be that comes up a bit with people, you know, well, something great must have been in this relationship if you have children with this person. Well, you can love these children that you have, obviously, with that you had in this relationship, but don't, you know, think that that all happened simply because that was a choice between two people. You know, keep in mind that you have somebody in a relationship who's dictating what happens in that relationship on all fronts. So physically, sexually, financially, every which way. So if that person wants to have children, they're going to find every way for that to happen. So, you know, when people use that, because they do, against women, especially for having children with their partner, as well, something great, you know, you can't say everything was horrible in that relationship. Just keep in mind that, again, when we talk about marital rape, that is a real thing. I just want to point that out because that happens, and shaming women for having children in their relationships and saying, well, everything must have been great, that is not okay.
And I've seen that repeatedly, especially, you know, in my own case when it came time for court. You know, that was something they prepared me for, was the fact that they were going to say, you know, well, hey, something, you know, there must have been good times because you have children. So there must have been good times somewhere. Everything couldn't have all been bad. Well, I was told early on that I was never to deny my abuser sex. And the first time that I denied my abuser sex, my jaw was broken. So I wasn't allowed to utilize birth control. If I was found using birth control, there were penalties for that. I hear it over and over again. Well, why did you have 3 kids? Well, why did you have this many children? Well, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And again, my jaw got broken because I said no. So that's just my personal experience. Other women have many other different experiences and things that happen to them if they were to say no, if they were to not want to have a child, if they were to get caught with birth control. I remember the first couple of times I got caught with birth control. I mean, it was not good for me. It was not good at all. And I don't, you know, I give a lot of details about stuff that has happened to me in the past with hopes that you guys will understand that this stuff is real. There are some details I choose not to give. There are a lot of things that happened to me because why would I want to have sex with someone that was beating me? it's not something that, you know, you can look at a woman and say, oh, well, this is what she wanted because, you know, she has children, or, you know, she did this, or she, no, it's a matter of what's going to happen to you if you don't do those things. What is the ramifications of you saying no, or you saying anything? There's no, I don't feel like it today. You're going to get damaged for saying things like that. I know I got damaged for saying things like that. I know that I had I literally had to go to my doctor and lie and say that my child had hit me jumping on the trampoline just to get the medical attention I needed for a broken jaw, because I said, no, I didn't want to have sex today. It's not as black and white as people think. There's so many gray areas here, and people think, and again, I've heard it so many times when it comes to the court situation. You know, they're trying to prepare you for it, and they know that, you know, the other person on the other side for the defendant is going to say, you know, well, there must have been great times because you have children. It doesn't mean that there were great times because you have children. It could have been that you were in a situation where you were being gagged and bound, and that's how, you have no idea what's happening behind closed doors. And to make assumptions like that, it's very harmful to all of us, because it's not what's happening. And just because children are loved doesn't mean they were made out of love. Okay, because most people in domestic violence relationships are not in a situation where they can't wait to get home and go to bed and have sex tonight. No, they just got the shit kicked out of them. Like, that's not happening, but it's yet another form of control, right? So we're sitting here and, you know, you've been hit and you've been pushed down to the ground, and now sex is on the forefront. And there's many different reasons why that person wants to have sex with you. One of them is that absolute last piece of control for today. And now they've got you in every single way and direction that they can. And now you're scared because you don't know what your limits are. You don't know where you can say no and where you allow it to continue, because you have no choices. So sexual abuse in relationships, in marriage, and marital rape is real. I mean, I have spoken to several women that have all said they no longer wanted to have sex with their husbands, but they had no choice but to have sex with their husbands, because what was going to happen had they said no, whether it be not being able to do anything, whether it be not having any money put in their accounts to be able to, like, it's an array of different things that happen when you say no. So you have to understand that an abuser wants complete control. It's not just control over this little bit or that little bit, and they're going to give you the freedom for this. No, they want control over everything. So when I hear these things and I hear women say to me, you know, that they're so sad because they have children and they're being criticized for the fact that they have children with their abuser, please understand that it's not all what you think it is. It may have started off okay, but in the end, no matter how many children somebody has, saying, well, there must have been some good times. No, those actually could have been the absolute worst times. Those could have been times when they were forced to do things that they absolutely did not want to do. Right. And hence, here's a child. And understand that those children are another crutch for the abuser. Because now, if you have children with your abuser, you're tied to them again. Yes. It's all about that control.
Mm-hmm. And it's another pawn that they can use to threaten you with. So mm-hmm. I will find a way to take your kids away from you. So as Jen said, just because a child was not made in love, that doesn't mean that they're not loved. So, you know, again, now here's something I can take away from you. And that is one of the biggest pawns that you can use, because, you know, you can find a way to live on your own, you know, not all the time, please don't get me wrong. But if you can think of, okay, if I can just think of myself getting away, you know, if that's the place that you're at, leaving, and I only have to think of me, that's it, you know, it may seem more feasible. And you know, abusers know that. Yep. You know, I wish we could say they're all stupid. Unfortunately, that's not the case. You know, they're manipulative, and they think about these things, and they know. So if you have to think about another person, it is not going to be so easy for you to pack up and leave, you know? And so again, and especially if if it's a baby, you know what I mean? Like there's so much that comes. So there's so much that comes with this, you know, that there's so much, not just, there's so much intent that comes with it, you know, of how this whole thing is planned out. Did you want to add anything else to that before I move on to just the last section, Jen?
No, I mean, I think
Okay.
you covered a lot on that one.
Okay. And this actually just so flows right into everything. So the last, and there's some other like small other, you know, areas of abuse too that we didn't quite touch on, but these are the main areas that we're talking about today. So the last one today is financial and economic abuse. So a study by the Centers for Financial Security found that 99% of domestic violence cases also involved financial abuse. Economic abuse is a form of abuse when one intimate partner has control over the other partner's access to economic resources, which diminishes the victim's capacity to support themselves and forces them to depend on the perpetrator financially. Here are some examples of that. Telling the person, I'm just telling you what you can and can't buy. Taking your car keys so you can't go to work. So this may sound ridiculous, but honestly, imagine you're trying to go to work. I'm not letting you go to work. I'm going to take your keys. So now you can't go to work. You have to make excuses. Imagine if that happens multiple times a month. How many excuses can you possibly make to your job why you can't get to work? That's utterly ridiculous. You're not going to have a job anymore. I'm going to add to that other instances of behaviors that add to this, where a person will do something that intentionally causes their partner to lose their job, which is, again, you know, financial control and abuse. So stalking, constantly calling, doing anything that is essentially menacing and controlling. So again, forces you to end up losing your job. So without a job, you have no finances coming in. They have control of, they're the ones that are paying for everything. They have access a lot of times to your bank account. They will find a way to have access to your bank account. They will max out your credit cards. So now you have, if you don't have just a paycheck coming in, you also have no way to pay for anything on your own. So again, dependent on this person. Or you also are in a situation that when you are trying to say, plan to leave, how do you do that? You have no income, you have no credit cards, you have absolutely no financial assets. So even though we've talked about in the past, I think it was our very first podcast, other ways to do that, in your mind, even though we talked about not using credit cards, but in your mind, these are the things that you use. These are all your assets. You have none of them. You're stuck. You're in a house with a person who controls your food, your housing, your clothing. You know, oftentimes it's, here's an allowance if you're lucky, and if not, they're doing it all for you. And so now you're sitting in a home and you're completely 100% dependent on them with no access to anything financially. For some people who get, you know, other forms of income coming in, whether it be, let's say you get your taxes. I just blanked for a second. So your taxes come in. If they weren't an automatic payment into your account, an automatic deposit, that check, they take it. And if it is an automatic deposit and they have control over your account, that's their money. So financial abuse and control is huge. And it is, again, one of the first things. And as I said, 99% of domestic violence cases are involved with financial abuse, because it is one of the first things that an abuser will do, is make sure that they slowly but surely try to make sure that they have control of all of your assets.
And honestly, like, again, hit the nail on the head. One of the first, yes. Like, I was in college pursuing my own thing when I first met my abuser. His mom owned, that's how I became an esthetician years ago. Okay. I was 20 years old going to school to be an esthetician, which I never had ever thought about in my life. But my abuser utilized the situation. His mom owned a very successful salon in South Dartmouth, and she was older. And one day he looked at me, and this goes to show you the magnitude of manipulation that someone goes through, okay? And that someone actually puts their mind to utilize against somebody. So here I am, 20 years old, I'm in college, and one day he just looked at me and said, hey, you know, my mom's getting older, it would be awesome if you dropped out of college, went to school to be an esthetician, and we could take over the business. She could work part-time, still have a job, still maintain her status, her social status as being this great spa owner. And everything's going to work out fine. And I thought to myself, wow, what a nice guy, right? Like, he's thinking ahead. He's thinking about his mom. You know, everyone tells you, go by how they treat their moms, right? If they treat their moms great, then, you know, you're going to be okay. Well, here was this guy completely lying to me, telling me and making me feel like what he was asking me to do was a great idea, because I was going to be able to help his family and everybody was going to be great. I was going to create a career for myself that I would, you know, have forever. Eventually we would take over the salon. Everything would be peachy keen. Well, that was straight bullshit, because I literally went to school to be an esthetician, started working there, and his mother was monitoring me. That's why I was asked to work there. That's why this whole thing came about, because he wanted to know where I was at all times. And, you know, through these podcasts, I get a lot of people who see different aspects of my life now. And there are people that have reached out to me that I worked with at the salon that say, oh my God, I remember him calling like 5 times in a row. And if you didn't come to the phone, he would call back for his mother. And if his mother didn't come to the phone, he would show up at the salon. Happened many times. That was a way of control. Now, when I wasn't working at the salon anymore, he opened a business. I wasn't allowed to go get a job. I wasn't allowed to have control of my own money. The only thing I was allowed to do was go work for his business. And it was always put in a sense like, this is what you're doing for the family. This is what you're doing to make our family better. This is how things are going to be better for everybody, because financially we're going to be together. No one's going to run a business like we are together. Mind you, while he was doing the work part of it, so I was basically in the office and in the storefront, and when he was actually executing the work part of it, he was bragging to all of his guys that worked for him the bad things he did to me the night before, a couple nights before. Everybody on our crew knew that I was being abused. No one, of course, intervened or could do anything about it. Some of them ended up leaving, I'm sure, because they just couldn't take much more of it. But again, it goes back to the financial abuse, right? So financially, I had nothing. When I drove away with my kids, it was myself, my car, my 2 children, and my dog. That's all I left with. I spent 5 years at my mom's house building myself back up to who I am today. Started a whole different career, have everything that I need now to take care of myself and my children. Never ever received a dime of support. So I had a lot of work to do in order to get myself to where I am today, because I literally left with nothing. Not a penny to my name. He had taken everything from me. You want to talk about credit cards being maxed. I mean, he had such horrible credit that everything for the business, I today still, and this floors me, I still am paying off debt today that literally had nothing to do with me, had everything to do with the business, in which I obviously didn't get anything from, because it ended up, he bankrupted it. And I still have $20,000 worth of debt from $60,000 from 5 years ago. So that lingers. And luckily, yes, I was able to get away, but I got away with a massive amount of debt that had nothing to do with me. And I could have very well stayed longer and longer and longer, A, trying to pay the debt down, and B, hoping that, you know, something was going to break somewhere and I was going to get a financial break where I could make my own money and I could do these things on my own. I left not having any idea if I was going to be able to make it on my own, just knowing that I had to get the hell out of there, and this was my opportunity. My window of opportunity came. I wasn't allowed to just leave. My window of opportunity came. I was told I was only allowed to go stay at my mom's house. It's exactly where I went. And I built myself up from there. But the financial part of it, how can you leave? If it weren't for me being able to have a place to go, I would have never been able to just get up and leave with 2 kids, a dog, and no place to go and no money, because I certainly didn't have any money by the time I left that place. I was wiped out and in serious debt. So financial abuse is what really holds people together for a long time, because how are you going to be able to make it without money? You can't. So it holds you to your abuser.
Absolutely. So again, you know, we say that so much of what we're trying to do is support, you know, those that are currently in these situations, but it really is that we're just trying to talk to everybody, and we're just trying to say as a community that, you know, if you can help somebody, if you can listen, if you can be, you know, that person who says, you know, if I can hold some money, if I can be there even for a short amount of time, you know, help you get back on your feet, or find a way to assist you getting back on your feet in some way. You know, we get it. Like, we're not asking people to put their lives, you know, in a situation that might be unsafe. That's not what we're saying. We understand everybody's, you know, has their own stuff going on. Absolutely. But you know what? Sometimes, you know, if you take a step back and you say, but I do have an extra room, or I do have, you know, this, you know, I have these over here. I can get you some gift cards. I can get you started. I can get you, you know, in the sense of, you know, getting you, when I say gift cards, I'm talking about, like, say for the grocery store, I can get you started here. I can do a few things. You know, if everybody kind of works together as family, friends, coworkers to try to be a support, you'd be surprised when people get together how much they can support somebody. And I will say this, that just knowing that you have people that are saying we can help, what a boost that is to someone, to let them know that if all of these people are at least trying and they're behind me, I can do this. I can do this. And it's a struggle and it's going to be difficult, but I know that I can make this. I can make this happen, and I can make it. And I feel less isolated. And so it's just a thought, you know, just to keep in mind that if you can help, you know, and again, as we've said before, even if it's just an ear to listen, that is very important as well.
It is. And we wanted to go over all of these, not signs, but all of these different types of abuse, because a lot of people don't realize that they're in an abusive relationship. I mean, I've worked with a lot of women over the last couple of weeks. One is very specific to me because I worked with her before. I worked with her last year, and she told me about all of these things that were happening to her, except minus the physical part. And so I tried to explain to her that that was coming. And eventually the physical abuse was going to start. But she didn't understand it because she hadn't reached a point where she was physically abused. But all of these other things were already happening. And I kept trying to explain to her my own situation, say, hey, listen, you know, if on my first date he had reached over the table and punched me in the face, I would have never dated him again. But that's not how it works.
Right.
Okay, there's so much manipulation that goes into abuse from your abuser that they don't just, obviously you're not going to hang out with somebody again that does something like that. But when I see women, and I worked with women a year ago, and I see these things that are definitely going to happen, but they don't understand it because they're physically not being assaulted right now. And then we fast forward a year, and that same woman is calling me saying, yeah, Jen, you were right. Now it's physical. Now what do I do? Now how am I going to get out of this situation? We don't want to see that happen.
No.
We want to try to prevent that as much as possible. So we're giving you all these different types of abuse because we want you to see that just because you're not being physically assaulted does not mean that it's not going to lead to you being physically assaulted. And those emotional scars, some of those things that I personally have gone through, for example, just my central nervous system by itself. Once I had gotten away, the damage that my physical body had endured in the trauma of just being tense and nervous at all times, that took me a year, if not more, to calm my body down and realize that I was going to be okay. Like these things weren't going to happen to me anymore. But physically and inside, I was an emotional, nervous wreck because I was so used to chaos that not being in a chaotic situation was odd to me. I didn't know what to do with myself. Here I was happy. I had met a great guy, thank God. And none of these things were happening to me. We're fast forwarding, obviously, years past. But I didn't know how to accept any of that because I was waiting for the ball to drop at any time.
Mhm.
And we're trying to make it so that you guys understand abuse is not just physical. The physical part is the part that people see. It's what's happening behind closed doors with words, with actions. Those are the things that are really tearing people down.
Mhm.
The physical abuse for me, I knew as soon as it was done, as soon as I was done being hurt, that that part was done. Now I had to deal with how I was going to make myself look like I hadn't just been physically hurt. But the emotional, waiting for him to come home and not knowing what today was going to bring, that was 10 times worse for me than getting a black eye.
Mhm.
Like, I could cover that up. Inside, I couldn't cover up how I felt, how
Mhm.
sick I felt, just knowing that, oh my God, it's 6 o'clock. He should be home any minute now. What's going to happen today? How is he going to react today? What have I done today that I don't even realize I've done? So we're going to finish up today, but please really understand that domestic violence and domestic abuse is not just the physical part of it. There are so many other aspects of it. And if you are in a situation where any of these aspects are happening, please don't feel as though this is it. This is the end. This is all that's going to happen to me. It's not all that's going to happen to you. Later on, as that person becomes more and more comfortable with how much they're breaking you down, that's when the physical abuse starts. So we want to thank you all for watching today. Sherry, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I was just going to really quickly just say that if you do, say you decide after listening to these things, or that you think that you have a thought about somebody's relationship, or just know, just because of my own experience in working with a lot of clients who, the moment that we sometimes start having these conversations, I don't see them again, unfortunately, because they're in a lot of denial about what's going on. Don't be surprised if you decide you are the person who says, hey, can I check in with you about something, if that person actually shuts down and becomes very much in denial, because that can happen. And so I know, as we're talking about all this stuff, we were saying, be supportive, do this, do that. And you know if you do reach out to somebody, just know that that might be the first time anyone's ever had a conversation with somebody, and you may completely blindside them, and that, one, they're still in denial, as we've talked about, for themselves, that this is not abuse. And also, again, that you're asking them about something that they are so not ready to talk about yet, period. And so just know that sometimes people aren't always ready, and they're in such deep denial of what's going on in their relationship. Like I said, I've had that happen in therapy, and that I've literally had people leave, and I've never, unfortunately, seen them again as we've gotten into these topics and tried to start talking about it with them. So just know that that can happen. It's not a surprise. It's a very normal reaction. Just letting them know that if and when they're ever ready, you're there, and sometimes that's all you can do, and that's okay. And hopefully they know that the door is open, if they ever decide to walk through it. That's all I wanted to say.
Yep, and absolutely, because it does take time, and those are open wounds, and a lot of us don't want to admit, for a myriad of reasons, that they are being or in a domestic violence relationship. So yes, as Sherry said, keep that door open, keep that communication open. Let them know, that it's okay. It's okay that you don't want to talk about this right now, but when you're ready to talk about it, I'm here for you. That is the most important thing, is to be there for somebody. So thanks everybody for watching once again. Have a great weekend. To any of our dads out there watching, happy Father's Day.
Happy
And
Father's Day.
we'll see you next week.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.